So today we'll be talking about imposition of price ceiling and price floor. As I have discussed in my previous video, the sixth principle of economics says that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Note the use of the word usually in the sense that markets may not be a good way to organize economic activity in all situations. So that is when the sixth principle of economics fails. Now, being a principle of economics, there must be a solution which has already been laid forward in the sense that when the sixth principle of economics fails, that is when the market cannot clear on its own through the mechanisms of demand and supply that determine the quantity demanded and supplied in the market and the price prevailing in the market, then we usually move on to the seventh principle of economics. So let's see what it says. The seventh principle of economics says that the government can sometimes improve economic outcomes. So essentially, when the market fails to operate and give the socially optimum outcome, it is the government that plays a major role in improving the economic outcome or the improvement of the outcome that the market provides. So let's look at two certain situations where the market outcomes are not the most efficient or the most socially optimum situation. And in those cases, how the government can intervene in the market system so as to result in a better or a socially more appreciable outcome. So let's look at the first application. This is a situation when the market price is too high for normal consumers. So let's say that the market price of a particular commodity is so high that a lot of people who actually need the commodity cannot buy. In this case, the government will intervene in the market so that a lot more consumers can come into the fold of the market system, and naturally the market outcome, or rather the government intervened market outcome, is expected to give a better or socially more appreciable outcome. So let's look at a diagram to express our view. We are looking at a diagram where price is taken on the vertical axis and quantity is taken on the horizontal axis. As we know, this is the conventional form of expressing the market of in an economy. So we also have the conventional upward rising supply curve and also the conventional downward sloping demand curve. Now notice that the equilibrium price P star, which is given by the intersection of the demand curve and the supply curve, is pretty high considering it's a normal market system. The quantity demanded has no such fault, but we can definitely see that it's relatively high. Of course, it depends upon the units taken under consideration, but under the diagram that we have considered, we can, however, say that the market price may be deemed too high for certain consumers. And as a result, there may be certain people who are unwilling to transact at this given price. So what can the government do is, at this situation, the government can impose a price ceiling, which is given by the red line, which lies below the P star level. So this price ceiling essentially ensures that the price does not climb above the given price ceiling. P star is a market outcome, which means P star depends on the demand function and the supply function of the market. It is determined completely by the market forces, and P star has no government intervention in it. So it's completely automatically generated. P ceiling, however, which is the price ceiling, is completely decided by the government. It depends on various factors, how important the commodity is. If the commodity being supplied and demanded in the market is very important, and there are a lot of people who need to have the commodity, then the government might impose a lower price ceiling so that a lot more people can afford it. Furthermore, the price ceiling is essentially always below the market price. We'll talk more about how to remember it, but know that the ceiling of a room is the top of a room. So essentially, there's nothing above it, which means that the price ceiling is essentially the highest price that can be charged by the suppliers for that particular commodity. So essentially, if you charge any price below the price ceiling, then it's not legally offensive. It is allowed to charge a price lower than the price ceiling, but it is not allowed to charge a price higher than the price ceiling. So the obvious corollary would be that if the market equilibrium is below the already imposed price ceiling, that is, if the market outcome is lower than the government imposed price ceiling, then the equilibrium does not change, in the sense that it is already abiding by the price ceiling set by the government. So that is why if a price ceiling needs to be imposed or it needs to be enforced, then the price ceiling should always be put such that it is lower than P star or the market generated price. Now, we know that a market outcome is always efficient. So if we are tampering with the market, then there must be certain problems generated. So let's look at the problem which is generated when a government imposes a price ceiling. So if the government imposes P ceiling as the price ceiling, then the quantity supplied in the market would be the point at which the horizontal price line given by price ceiling, the red line, intersects the supply curve, and the quantity supplied would be OQS. So as we know, this intervention will definitely cause certain problems, and as we can see from the diagram, the quantity supplied is less than the initially offered market equilibrium quantity. Similarly, if we look at the demand curve perspective, we can see that the point at which the red price ceiling price line cuts the demand curve, the orange line essentially is the amount of quantity demanded by the market agents. So that's OQD. So here we can see that the quantity supplied in the market at the given price ceiling is OQS, whereas the quantity demanded by the agents of the market at the given price ceiling is OQD. How we can justify this is by the law of demand. If the price of a particular commodity falls, then the quantity demanded increases. So here we can see, since the price fell from P star to P ceiling, or rather the price was reduced artificially by the government from P star to P ceiling, the quantity demanded of that increased from Q star to QD. Similarly, we can say that from the law of supply, if the price of a particular commodity supplied by producers in a market falls, then the suppliers of the commodity will reduce their supply. So as the price P star was artificially reduced by the government to P ceiling, the producers essentially will obviously reduce the price supplied, reduce the quantity supplied at the given price P ceiling in the market. So the quantity supplied by the producers falls or is reduced from Q star to QS. Essentially what happens is there is a disparity in QD, that is the quantity demanded at the market price, here price ceiling, or the artificial market price rather, and the quantity supplied in the market. This is essentially a case of disequilibrium, and if left untouched, the market will readjust through market forces and Adam Smith's so-called invisible hand, so as to move towards the original equilibrium point, P star Q star. So the government must ensure and intervene so as to keep this disparity in line and ensure that the market that the government has artificially created stays in the position that it was created. So as we can see, the quantity demanded and quantity supplied is essentially far apart from each other. And we can see that since OQD is greater than OQS, there is an excess demand in the market, and the government might use certain policies and measures to keep this excess demand ongoing in the market. What the market can usually do is, if say suppose an agricultural food or suppose something very important to the society is being produced, and somehow the market generates a higher price for it. What the government can do is the government can impose a price ceiling that will reduce the quantity supplied at the market price, and the government can procure the entire quantity OQS. After that, the government might introduce a rationing system. So for example, in India, we have the public distribution system, and what it does is the government rations it to people who actually need it the most. So the OQS quantity is distributed among the entire population of OQD, so that people who actually or genuinely need the product get it before others. Because as you can guess, the quantity demanded essentially implies how much money you have at hand, because the quantity demanded of the commodity depends on your purchasing power. It essentially does not, in that sense, signify how much you need the commodity, because demand can always has to be backed by purchasing power. So if you actually need it but you don't have the money at hand, the market does not allocate the resources to you. It always allocates resources towards people who have money at their hand. So what the government here does is the government procures the small amount of quantity supplied at the market, and it distributes it, rather redistributes it towards people who genuinely need the commodity, whether they have or they don't have the purchasing power to produce or to procure them in the free market. So essentially, the welfare of the economy to some extent will increase in the terms of the consumers of the market. So we'll later talk about how government intervention can affect the consumers and the producers of a market separately. But here we can conclude that at least some of the consumers are benefited. Definitely, some of the consumers are benefited in the sense that the price of the commodity comes down. We will talk about, however, the fact that there are certain people who lose from this outcome. So there's producer surplus and consumer surplus that we'll be talking about, but we can definitely conclude that some people will be better off. So this is called a situation of price ceiling, because price ceiling ensures that the price does not climb, rather the free market price does not climb over the set price ceiling, which is set by the government. So let's look at some other things that we need to keep in mind. As I said below, we must note that the price ceiling is always below, that is less than the equilibrium market price. So if the price ceiling is imposed, or rather if the market price is at $5, then the price ceiling must be set below $5. Only then will the market be forced to follow the price ceiling. If the price ceiling is set above the market price, $5, say the market price is $5 and the price ceiling is set at $10, then even the market outcome is following or legally abiding by the set price ceiling. So it does not impose itself. That is why the price ceiling always needs to be below, that is less than the equilibrium market price. Now, the easy way to remember it, as I mentioned before, is ceiling as the top of the room. Ceiling is the top of the room, so there is nothing above it. So if there's a price ceiling, then the price can lie anywhere below the price ceiling, but it cannot climb above the price ceiling. So there's nothing above it. However, okay, let's look at this first. Similarly, the government imposes price ceiling to ensure that the market price does not climb over a set price level, P ceiling, as I've mentioned before. However, there are certain cases when students like us, we get confused that ceiling is at the top of the room, so price ceiling is above or more than the equilibrium market. So they think that if ceiling is at the top of the room, then the price will be set at the top of the diagram. So ceiling means above, so the price ceiling is above, but that is not the correct way to interpret it. It needs to be interpreted such that the ceiling is at the top of the room and there's nothing above it. So it's the base price, and there can be price levels below the price ceiling, but it cannot be above the price ceiling. Moreover, as I've mentioned before, price ceiling creates excess demand in the market. So this is the situation at hand. Of course, it's part of the discussion, and there are certain other discussions which follow based on producer surplus and consumer surplus, which I'll be introducing in later videos, which entail from the discussion on price ceiling and the effect that it creates on the market in the form of deadbet loss and follow-ups. But this is the basic introduction of what we mean by a price ceiling.